What you are about to hear is a shattering, true-life story from the sun-drenched suburbs of Florida that will make you question the very foundations of trust, the complexities of cultural collision, and the devastating price paid when love is betrayed. This is the tragic yet universally human story of Savannah Savvy Hayes, an American wife who found herself caught in a secret life, and the explosive, terrifying confrontation with her Indian husband, Arjun A.J. Malhotra, after he discovered the truth about her infidelity in 2015. This tale is not just about cheating. It's about the emotional violence that erupts when two different worlds collide under the pressure of lies. It's about a man who saw his entire life, his family's honor, and his hard-won American dream crumble in a single gut-wrenching moment. Before we dive into this inescapable whirlpool of emotion and regret, I need you to understand that sharing stories this raw, this real, takes a kind of courage. If you value knowing the truth of these incredible, life-altering events, please do the simplest thing you can to support this channel. Hit that like button right now. It is your silent promise that this story will not be forgotten, and it ensures that others who need to hear this powerful message will find it. The air in Orlando, Florida, on the morning of July 12, 2015, carried the thick, humid scent of jasmine and impending rain. It was a day that started like any other in the perfectly manicured, gated community of Windermere, but it would end in a way that ripped a marriage and two lives to shreds. Arjun Malhotra, or AJ as his American friends called him, was a man who had earned his perfection. At 35, he was the picture of the immigrant success story, a brilliant software architect who ran a thriving IT firm, a six-figure salary, a beautiful Mediterranean-style home, and a gleaming black German sedan in the driveway. He was polite, driven, and intensely devoted to the woman who was the glittering jewel in his carefully constructed life. His wife, Savannah Hayes. Savvy, at 27, was a vision of American casual elegance. She had a cascade of sun-kissed blonde hair, eyes that were the color of the Florida ocean, and a smile that could, and often did, stop traffic. AJ had met her 2 years earlier, in 2013, at a corporate networking event in Miami. He was the quiet, confident tech head in a sharp suit. She was the effervescent marketing associate who laughed easily and drew everyone toward her light. Their courtship was a whirlwind, a clash of cultures that somehow magically seemed to work. AJ was grounded, traditional, and spoke of marriage and family with a reverence Savvy found missing in the fleeting relationships she'd had before. Savvy was spontaneous, free-spirited, and gave AJ a sense of easy belonging in America that his endless work had never provided. They married quickly, less than a year after meeting, in a small traditional ceremony that honored both his Indian heritage and her simple American roots. AJ's family, watching via video call from Mumbai, had poured their blessings and warnings onto their son. Warnings about the challenges of cross-cultural marriage and the sacred, non-negotiable expectation of lifelong fidelity. AJ had reassured them, his chest swelling with pride. Savvy was different, Savvy was his soulmate. But 2 years into their marriage, in the summer of 2015, the perfection was starting to show cracks, subtle fault lines that only Savvy could see. The beautiful house felt empty and silent for most of the day. AJ's dedication to his work was a double-edged sword. He would leave before dawn to talk to his teams in India and often not return until long after Savvy had eaten a lonely dinner. When he was home, he was often on his phone, solving global problems, while Savvy was left to navigate the quiet, isolating life of a wife without her own career, far from her family in rural Georgia. The cultural gulf began to widen. AJ's concept of a happy marriage was a well-kept home, financial security, and a wife who was always there, radiating warmth upon his return. Savvy's concept was shared adventure, deep emotional conversation, and the feeling of being a partner in the fullest sense of the word. AJ was providing everything, but Savvy felt like she was drowning in the abundance of things. She craved attention that wasn't filtered through a conference call. The loneliness became a gnawing ache, and the ache became a void that she desperately, foolishly sought to fill. That's where Reese came in. Reese Thompson was the rugged, affable personal trainer at Savvy's expensive gym. He was the antithesis of AJ, all immediate gratification and no long-term planning. He was an American man who understood her colloquialisms, her subtle shifts in mood, and could spend an hour talking about nothing more important than the best new craft beer or the latest blockbuster movie. Savvy justified the casual flirtation as harmless fun, a necessary distraction from the isolation. But flirtation, as it always does when born from a void, quickly became something more serious. Their first transgression was a clumsy, guilty, passionate mistake after a long, intense workout session. It happened in the late afternoon, when AJ was safely on a video call with clients in Singapore, a continent and a time zone away. Savvy felt an initial shocking wave of pleasure, quickly followed by a paralyzing tsunami of guilt. She was terrified of the moral line she had crossed, the sacred vows she had shattered, and the devastation she would cause if AJ ever found out. She knew that for a man like AJ, from a culture where fidelity is tied to a man's honor, and the reputation of his entire family, this was not just a personal failure. It was an act of profound, unforgivable humiliation. The weight of that knowledge made her stomach turn. But the fear, for all its intensity, was not enough to stop her. The brief, stolen moments with Reese became her lifeline, the only time she felt truly seen and alive outside the gilded cage of her silent, perfect home. She became an expert in deception, a master of subtle shifts in routine and emotion. She learned to scrub the faint scent of his cologne from her clothes, to delete specific texts before AJ even walked in the door, and to create elaborate stories about extended shopping trips or lunches with friends he had never met. The guilt became a constant companion, a heavy cloak she wore even while laughing on the phone with AJ's unsuspecting mother in India. She knew deep down that this double life was unsustainable, that every stolen moment added a dangerous, invisible pressure to the delicate structure of her marriage. She was building a powder keg, and she knew AJ, the passionate, traditional, deeply feeling man she married, would be the match that set it off. And yet she couldn't stop. She was addicted to the validation, the easy conversation, the sheer, intoxicating risk of her secret. The marriage became a performance, and Savvy was giving the performance of her life, smiling through the polite dinners, nodding through AJ's plans for their future, all while her mind was replaying her last stolen afternoon with Reese. She started to avoid intimacy with AJ, finding excuses, claiming stress or exhaustion. The lies were becoming thicker, harder to manage, twisting her beautiful, open nature into something guarded and anxious. AJ, for all his intelligence in the world of technology, was often blind to the subtle emotional tides in his own home. He attributed her anxiety to loneliness, offering to hire her an assistant or buy her a more expensive piece of jewelry, solutions that only drove Savvy further into her secret life. He was solving the wrong problem. The secret was now not just a betrayal, it was a character in the marriage, a suffocating, silent presence that sat between them at the dinner table. Savvy had convinced herself that she could control it, that she could maintain the lie long enough to either end the affair quietly or fix the foundational issues in her marriage. But secrets, especially those of the heart, rarely wait for the convenient moment to be revealed. They erupt, they explode, and they take down everything in their path. The clock was ticking, not toward a wedding, but toward a catastrophic moment of discovery that would redefine the word assault in the dark confines of their beautiful Florida home. Her heart pounded every time the front door opened, every time AJ's phone beeped, every time he looked her in the eye with his gentle, trusting, betrayed gaze. And if you are already feeling the tension of this inevitable explosion, and if you understand the gravity of the hidden truth, please consider subscribing to the channel right now. We are dedicated to bringing you the complex, unvarnished realities of life, and your subscription is the only way to guarantee you don't miss the conclusion of this emotional roller coaster. The lie was now officially bigger than the marriage. The lie was now officially bigger than the marriage, a dark entity that had taken root and was waiting for the perfect moment to destroy the hosts. That moment arrived not with a dramatic flourish, but with the silent, insidious efficiency of technology, the very thing Arjun Malhotra had mastered and built his life upon. On a Tuesday evening, just 1 week before their planned anniversary trip to the Caribbean, AJ was working late in his spacious, meticulously organized home office. He was troubleshooting a minor latency issue on his home network, a small annoyance that only a high-level software architect would even notice. In the process, he was checking the security logs for all connected devices. He saw an unfamiliar device ID briefly pop up on the network log, a ghost device that had connected and disconnected several times in the past few weeks, always around the middle of the afternoon. It was nothing, a neighbor's fluke, he told himself. But the quiet certainty in his gut, the one thing a man like AJ never ignored, told him otherwise. Curiosity, that silent killer of peace, took hold. AJ cross-referenced the device's unique network address with the list of all the devices he and Savy owned. He quickly identified it as an older tablet, one Savy had insisted on keeping just in case, but rarely used, sitting dormant in a drawer in the guest room. The rational part of AJ's mind told him to stop, to close the log, to pour a drink and forget about it. The traditional, deeply rooted part of him, the part that honored the sacred trust of marriage above all else, compelled him to investigate. He retrieved the tablet, powered it on, and found it already logged into a variety of accounts Savy had used before she bought her newest smartphone. Most of the data was old, abandoned, harmless. But as he scrolled through a forgotten messaging application she must have left active on the device, the digital trail of her betrayal began to unspool like a toxic thread. The initial messages were innocuous, casual chat between Savy and a contact saved simply as R. But the tone shifted quickly, the friendly banter turning into breathless, intimate planning. Then came the photos, snapshots of Savy he had never seen, dressed in clothes he didn't recognize, smiling a wide, relaxed smile she hadn't directed at him in months. But it was the content of the text that delivered the fatal blow, a sequence of exchanges that left no doubt, no ambiguity, not one single molecule of plausible deniability. Messages coordinating meeting times while he was at work, confirming the empty house status, and expressing a casual, reckless affection that AJ realized had been completely absent from his own marriage for months. The dates were all there, stark and unforgiving, confirming that this wasn't a one-time mistake, but a calculated, ongoing deception that had been happening for the better part of a year. He saw the name Reese finally appear in one of the messages, the full, crushing identity of the ghost who had invaded his life. The discovery didn't trigger an immediate, shouted rage. Instead, it was far more terrifying. A freezing, seismic shift occurred in AJ's personality. The dedicated, calm, successful software architect disappeared, replaced by a man utterly paralyzed by shock, humiliation, and a pain so profound it was physical. He walked to the living room, the beautiful, expensive, sun-drenched space he had worked so hard to pay for, and sat down on the leather sofa, the abandoned tablet a heavy, betraying presence in his hand. Every achievement, every sacrifice he had made to build this perfect life in America, now felt like a cruel, elaborate joke played on him. He saw the faces of his parents, his uncles, the entire extended family in Mumbai, all of whom had placed their family honor, on his shoulders, expecting him to uphold the sanctity of their traditions, even across the world. Savy's actions in his cultural context were not just a personal betrayal, they were an insult to his family name, a public shaming that the community back home would whisper about for years if it ever got out. The man he was, the future he had planned, the respect he commanded, all of it was vaporizing into the humid Florida air. He was completely, irrevocably broken. AJ didn't move for 2 hours. He didn't cry, he didn't smash anything. He simply sat, the silence of the large house now a deafening accusation. He reread the texts, not because he needed confirmation, but because the rational, analytical part of his mind was desperately trying to find an algorithm, a logical explanation for such a catastrophic failure. There was none. Just reckless, easy betrayal. He spent a few minutes scrolling through Reese's public social media profile, easily finding the personal trainer who was the other man in his wife's stolen moments. Seeing the man's face, his easy confidence, the casual way he looked, was like a branding iron being pressed onto AJ's soul. He was furious at Reese, but the white-hot core of his rage, the truly destructive force, was directed solely at Savy, the woman who had smiled at him over dinner, who had slept beside him, all while conducting a double life built on his trust and his money. And I need to pause here for a moment because if you can feel the weight of this man's cultural shame, the sheer, crushing betrayal he is experiencing, then you understand why this story must be told. Show your empathy and help this channel by hitting the like button on this video. Do it now because the moments leading up to the confrontation are too tense to look away from, and your click is the only reason we keep telling these raw, unfiltered truths. Savy finally arrived home at 6:45 p.m., later than usual. She was humming a tune, her bag slung casually over her shoulder, a lightness in her step that AJ immediately recognized as the lingering residue of her time with Reese. The perfection of the house felt immediate and wrong to her. The silence was deeper than usual. The kitchen was already spotless, and she realized AJ must have been home for hours, yet there were no dinner preparations, no sign of his usual post-work routine. She called his name, her voice echoing unnervingly in the foyer. AJ? You home? She found him in the living room. The room was bathed in the warm, setting sun, but AJ was cloaked in a chilling, unnatural darkness. He was still sitting on the sofa, motionless, perfectly composed, yet radiating a coldness that instantly made the hairs on Savi's arms stand up. His glasses were off, and his eyes, usually kind and filled with a gentle warmth, were blank, vast oceans of nothing. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking through her, at the wall behind her, at some private, personal hell she couldn't see. I'm here, Savi, he said, his voice flat, devoid of the melody and accent she had grown so accustomed to. It sounded like a voice stripped down to bone and steel. Savi's humming died in her throat. She dropped her purse onto the marble floor, the sound a sharp crack in the heavy air. She knew instantly. The sheer, suffocating certainty of it slammed into her like a physical blow. The game was over. She swallowed hard, trying desperately to construct a defense, a denial, a plea, anything. But the cold certainty in AJ's posture made every lie feel futile. What is it, honey? Is something wrong? She asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. She took one tentative step closer, seeing the tablet sitting next to him on the cushion. AJ finally turned his head, slowly, deliberately, his eyes locking onto hers. They were the eyes of a stranger, a judge, a ghost of the man she had married. Something is wrong, yes, he said, and he picked up the tablet, holding it loosely, the screen facing her. On the screen was the final devastating message from Reese. Can't wait for you tomorrow, Savi. Tell AJ you're getting your hair done. The casual cruelty of the lie, the easy dismissal of her husband, was magnified 1,000 times by the stillness of AJ's face. Savi began, the word catching in her throat, instantly realizing that a lie would only deepen the hole she was already in. Tears sprang into her eyes, not just of fear but of profound, immediate regret. AJ, please. Let me explain. AJ didn't raise his voice. He didn't move a muscle, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. Explain what, Savannah? Explain the hundreds of times you told me you were at the grocery store when you were here. In this house? Explain why you desecrated our home, our vows, the honor of my family for this thing. The word thing was delivered with a calculated venom that stripped her of all human dignity. I paid for this life, Savi. I gave you everything. And you used my trust and my money and the life I built for you to humiliate me. You made me a laughingstock, a fool who can't even keep his own house in order. He stood up, towering over her, and for the first time, Savi saw the raw, terrifying power of his suppressed rage. His voice finally broke, shattering the composure and revealing a volcanic core of pain. I sacrificed everything for this dream, Savi. Everything. And you threw it all away because you were bored. You betrayed me, and you betrayed my mother who prayed for you. How could you look me in the eye and lie, every single day? He didn't yell, he didn't scream, he whispered the words, but they hit her with the force of an actual punch. He didn't want an explanation. He wanted an answer to a question that had no answer. How could you? His quiet grief was terrifying, a sign that the emotional violence would be far worse than any physical act. Savi backed away, hands up, feeling the perfect life they had built together collapsing all around her. The confrontation was not over. It had only just begun, entering a terrifying new phase where the only thing left to lose was her safety. The confrontation was not over. It had only just begun, entering a terrifying new phase where the only thing left to lose was her safety. AJ's stillness, more than any physical violence, was what truly terrified Savi. He had removed the traditional cultural restraints he lived by, and what was left was a wounded animal, humiliated and desperate for justice as he perceived it. He followed her as she instinctively retreated towards the hallway, his steps slow, deliberate, and thudding heavily on the marble floor. Don't you dare walk away from me, Savi, he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. After all the lies, the one thing you owe me is the truth, right here, right now. Tell me what I did wrong. Tell me why I wasn't enough. His question was laced with the raw, self-hating anguish of a man whose identity was tied to his success and control, both of which had been stripped away by her infidelity. Savi felt a rush of desperate empathy, knowing her actions had caused this pain, but the rising fear for her own well-being eclipsed everything else. She knew she was not dealing with the AJ she married, but a man driven by cultural shame and personal agony. AJ, please don't. You didn't do anything wrong, she pleaded, her voice a ragged whisper. I was lonely. I made a terrible mistake. It was just a way to feel like I mattered outside of this house. Please, let's talk later. Let's just breathe. Her words, meant to de-escalate, only seemed to enrage him further. To him, lonely and a mistake were trivializations of a betrayal that had ripped a hole in his soul. Lonely? He scoffed, a dark, humorless laugh escaping him. You were lonely, so you ruined our lives? You risked everything I worked for so you could be with a common gym instructor? The contempt for Reese was palpable, but it was aimed like a poisoned dart directly at Savy. His cultural pride, his social standing, and his professional success all made him view her choice as a profound insult to his very manhood. He grabbed her arm, his fingers tightening with a sudden, shocking force that made her cry out. Where were you today, Savy? He demanded, pulling her closer, forcing her to look into the eyes that were now blazing with a terrifying mix of fury and heartbroken confusion. Were you with him today? Were you in my car? Did you bring him into this house again? He was demanding details, not for understanding, but for the painful validation of his worst fears, a desperate need to quantify the depth of his humiliation. Savy, terrified by the sudden shift to physical force, tried to pull away. You're hurting me, AJ. Let go. Her resistance only seemed to confirm his belief that she was still hiding something. The struggle escalated quickly. AJ shoved her against the wall, the back of her head hitting the plaster with a dull, sickening thud. The world swam for a moment and Savy gasped, realizing the situation had crossed a dangerous line. The gentle, meticulous man she had married was gone, replaced by a stranger capable of violence. You will not leave this room until I have every truth, every moment, every humiliating detail, he hissed, his face inches from hers. He was consumed by the need for confession, the cultural demand for atonement for the shame she had brought upon him. If you are feeling the shock of this terrifying turn, if your heart is pounding with the realization of Savy's sudden danger, then this is the moment to act. Please hit the like button right now. Your support is a shield that allows us to share the unvarnished truth about the escalation of domestic conflict, and that truth is vital. Savy knew she had to get out, not just for her safety, but for the survival of whatever sliver of sanity AJ had left. She pushed past him, scrambling towards the kitchen door, hoping to reach the spare key to her car. AJ reacted instantly, moving with a speed born of rage. He grabbed her by the shoulder and spun her back around, his strength overwhelming. He wasn't aiming to hurt her, not initially, but to control her, to force her to face the shame he felt. He wrestled her back into the living room, slamming the front door shut with a resounding final boom that sealed her inside with him. The assault was primarily an act of terror and confinement. He began to destroy the symbols of their shared American life, the things he had paid for. He overturned a side table, smashing a small porcelain vase Savy's mother had given them. He grabbed Savy's phone from the counter and hurled it against the opposite wall, shattering the screen and cutting off her line to the outside world. You won't call him. You won't call anyone. You will answer to me, he roared, his voice finally losing its whispered composure. The noise was deafening, the chaos a mirror of the destruction inside his mind. He stood over her, breathing heavily, his chest heaving with the effort of his suppressed agony and unleashed rage. Everything I told my family, about you, about us, about the perfect American life I built, is a lie because of you. You have made me a laughingstock. You will fix this. He grabbed a handful of her hair, pulling her head back painfully, forcing her to look up at him. You will send him a message. You will tell him it's over. You will tell him that you chose your husband, your real life. Savy, her eyes wide with pain and terror, nodded desperately. Yes, AJ. I'll do it. Just let go of me. Please. She knew he was trapped in a cultural crisis, desperate to regain control and salvage his reputation. She focused on survival, realizing that his desire for control was currently overriding his desire to physically harm her. She agreed to his demand, praying he would release her. He didn't release her immediately. Instead, he dragged her into the home office, the place of his power, the sterile room where he built his success. He sat her down in his chair and shoved his laptop towards her. Log in. Write the email. No. And don't you dare try to lie. He stood over her, a menacing, suffocating presence, watching her every keystroke. As Savy typed the final heartbreaking message to Reese, officially severing the affair, she was simultaneously writing the final tragic chapter of her marriage. The message was concise, cold, and final, dictated word for word by AJ, who stood guard, ensuring every sentence reflected the shame he wanted the other man to feel. When she clicked send, the last piece of her secret life vaporized. AJ watched the confirmation pop up, a look of grim, desolate satisfaction briefly crossing his face, a momentary victory in a war he had already lost. But the victory was hollow. The act of severing the external link only brought the conflict back inside the room, back to the two of them. He slammed the laptop shut and turned to her, his rage reignited, focusing now on her physical presence, the physical reality of the body that had betrayed him. You think that's it? You think an email fixes the shame? The shame I will carry to my grave. He grabbed a pair of discarded scissors from his desk, the gleaming steel reflecting the office light. He didn't point them at her. He pointed them at her hair, the beautiful, sun-kissed blonde hair that he had always loved, the hair that Reese had touched. You will carry the mark of this disgrace, he declared, his voice low and utterly terrifying. If you refuse to apologize properly to my family, if you refuse to show me you understand the magnitude of your betrayal, then you will not leave this house looking like the woman who brought shame upon my name. Savy knew in that horrifying moment that her life was in danger. She was trapped, isolated, and the cultural chasm between them had widened into a deadly abyss. Savy knew in that horrifying moment that her life was in danger. She was trapped, isolated, and the cultural chasm between them had widened into a deadly abyss. The scissors in AJ's hand became a terrifying symbol of his need for absolute control and his desire to physically brand her with her betrayal. He saw her hair, her appearance, her easy American beauty, as a source of his humiliation, a sign of her careless freedom. He approached her, his eyes cold and unwavering, the scissors trembling slightly in his grip. Get on the floor, he ordered, his voice flat, allowing no room for negotiation. Kneel. Apologize to my ancestors. Apologize for the shame you have brought upon the Malhotra name. His demand was no longer just personal, it was a desperate, primal cry for the cultural justice he felt entitled to. He needed to witness her complete submission and humiliation to feel a fraction of his honor restored. Savy, recognizing the depth of his cultural crisis, knew that submission was her only immediate path to survival. She dropped to her knees on the plush carpet, her hands clasped together, tears streaming down her face. She didn't offer a half-hearted apology. She gave him the performance he was demanding, begging for forgiveness, acknowledging the profound betrayal of his trust and the shame he felt. As she knelt there, humbled and broken, AJ's hand shot out. He grabbed a thick lock of her blonde hair, and before Savy could even register the motion, the shears snapped shut. The sound was sickeningly loud in the silent room, and a substantial chunk of her hair fell to the carpet. AJ stood back, his breathing ragged, a strange mixture of dark satisfaction and horrified confusion flashing across his face. He had acted out of pure, uncontrollable rage and cultural conditioning, and the realization of what he had done, a physical, irreparable act of violence, seemed to momentarily stun him. This brief moment of horrified paralysis was the opening Savy needed. She lunged away from him, crawling toward the corner of the office, shielding her head with her hands. AJ didn't immediately follow. He stood there, looking down at the fallen lock of hair, a tangible piece of the perfection he had shattered. He was a man drowning in his own rage and shame. If you are witnessing this descent into calculated cruelty and domestic violence, if you feel the gut-wrenching pain of Savy's humiliation, then you are a witness to an uncomfortable truth. We cannot look away from the ugly realities of life. Show your commitment to facing the truth by hitting that like button. We need your support to continue bringing these stories to light. You don't think I know what you are thinking? He spat, his eyes dark with suspicion. You think you can run to your American friends? You think they will save you? They will only see the desperate, cheating wife. They will not see the shame you brought to this family. He snatched the office phone from the hook and slammed it down on the desk, effectively cutting off the last piece of immediate communication. He had isolated her completely. The physical assault, though limited, had achieved its psychological purpose. Savy was utterly terrified and convinced that AJ was capable of anything. She knew that he would not let her leave the house looking injured, because that would draw the attention of the police, something AJ, the successful immigrant, feared more than anything else. He feared exposure and deportation, a loss of the American dream he had fought for, a loss that would cement his family's shame. As darkness fell outside, AJ's rage cooled into a terrifying, cold determination. He wasn't violent again, but his control became absolute. He forced Savy to sit at the kitchen table while he stood guard, his imposing figure blocking the only exit. He made her call her mother in Georgia, forcing her to lie and say she was sick and couldn't travel home for the next month. His voice, clear and cold, was audible in the background of the call, ensuring her mother heard the unnatural stiffness and control. "You will not go to the hospital. You will not go to the police," he stated clearly, leaning across the table, his eyes boring into hers. "You will stay here. You will rest. And tomorrow you will call my mother in Mumbai and you will tell her that you are learning to be a better wife, that you understand the importance of fidelity, and that you have decided to change your American ways. You will tell her that you are ready to give her grandchildren." This was the true final requirement for his forgiveness. A complete, public and permanent surrender of her identity and a pledge to conform to his traditional expectations. Savy, her body aching, her mind reeling, agreed to everything. She played the part of the compliant, remorseful wife, knowing that her compliance was the only key to her temporary freedom. She knew she had to wait for him to drop his guard, to let the exhaustion of his own rage and humiliation take over. The night was a living hell. AJ forced her into their bedroom, locking the door behind them. He didn't touch her, but he lay awake beside her, his body rigid, his breathing shallow, a silent, menacing presence in the darkness. Savy lay motionless, pretending to sleep, planning her escape with the precision of a military operation. She knew she had to be gone before morning, before he forced her to make the call to India that would be an indelible mark on her soul. Around 3 a.m. AJ's rigid control finally broke. Savy heard the deep, shuddering breaths of a man completely spent. He had finally fallen asleep, his exhaustion a mixture of sleepless nights of suspicion and the incredible emotional and physical energy expended during the confrontation. Savy waited 15 agonizing minutes, counting every beat of her own racing heart, ensuring his sleep was deep and irreversible. She moved with the silence of a ghost. She gently slid out of bed, her bare feet meeting the cold wood floor. She could see the glint of the keys to his car, the German sedan he guarded so fiercely, on the bedside table, right next to his phone. She left the phone, knowing the police would track its location, but took the keys. She knew she couldn't take her own car, as AJ had a spare key and could easily track it. She needed the anonymity of his high-end vehicle to get out of the state quickly. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She paused only to grab her smallest duffel bag, which she had pre-packed days earlier in a fit of desperate, paranoid foresight. She put on a random pair of jeans and a loose t-shirt, pulling the fabric up to cover the chopped section of her hair. She crept to the door, slowly turning the handle, praying the old Florida home's expensive hinges wouldn't squeak. She slipped out, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. She didn't dare turn on the lights. She moved through the house by the pale glow of the moon filtering through the windows, grabbing her credit cards and ID from her purse, which she found abandoned on the kitchen counter. Her broken phone lay on the floor of the office, a shattered relic of her communication. She didn't look back. She didn't mourn the life she was leaving. She only felt a fierce, burning focus on survival. She located the garage, fumbled with the key fob, and heard the slight, electrical whir of the garage door opening. It seemed impossibly loud. She slid into the driver's seat of the powerful, black sedan, her hands shaking as she inserted the key. She whispered a silent prayer and turned the ignition. The engine, thankfully, roared to life with a quiet, expensive hum. She backed out slowly, carefully, closing the garage door with the remote just as she pulled into the quiet, dark street. She was free, but only barely. The silence in the car was heavy with the knowledge that she was now a fugitive from her own marriage, driving a stolen car, fleeing a man who was capable of extreme violence. She drove straight for the highway, heading north, far away from the sun-drenched, shattered paradise of Windermere, Florida. She drove straight for the highway, heading north, far away from the sun-drenched, shattered paradise of Windermere, Florida. The black German sedan ate up the miles, a symbol of AJ's wealth and control now acting as Savy's vessel for freedom. She pushed the car hard, needing the blur of the passing landscape to distract her from the terror of the previous night. Every mile was a victory, but every shadow in her rearview mirror was a threat. She knew AJ would wake up soon, and his reaction would be devastating, calculated, and aimed at total destruction. Savi's first move was to reach a point of relative safety, a small, nondescript motel just across the state line in Georgia, her home state. She paid in cash, registered under a fake name, and collapsed onto the bed, physically and emotionally spent. The first thing she did was look at her reflection. The gash in her hair, crude and uneven, was a visible, undeniable testament to the psychological and physical violence she had endured. It was the mark of his shame, but she vowed it would become the mark of her survival. Here we stand at the precipice of her new life, watching Savi choose resilience over defeat. If you are moved by her strength and believe in the importance of survivors finding their voice, please honor that struggle by subscribing to this channel. Your subscription is a commitment to the cause of truth and a promise that her story and others like it will be heard. When AJ woke up a few hours later, the silence in the room was the first alarm. He reached for Savi's side of the bed, finding it cold. The sight of the empty space, the absence of his wife and the absence of his car keys, sent him into a frenzy of renewed rage and humiliation. He quickly checked his bank account, seeing the small, cash withdrawal Savi had made at a highway ATM near the state border. He knew she had fled. AJ's immediate reaction was to call the police, reporting his car stolen and his wife missing. But his narrative quickly crumbled under the cold, professional questioning of the responding officers. They asked about the last time he saw her, the nature of their argument, and whether there was any physical conflict. AJ, trying to maintain his image as the wrong, successful businessman, faltered. He could not, would not, admit to the physical altercation or the violent act of cutting her hair. He understood implicitly that admitting to domestic violence, especially in a cross-cultural marriage where he was the immigrant, would jeopardize his permanent residency status and his entire life in America. He quickly retracted the stolen car claim, rephrasing it as a marital dispute to avoid a felony charge, focusing instead on his concern for his wife. The police, however, had enough red flags: a sudden, unannounced departure, a missing person, and a nervous husband, to pay a visit to the Windermere home. The officers noted the shattered phone, the overturned table, and the undeniable tension in the air. Though no immediate charges were filed, an incident report was officially logged, recording the circumstances of Savi's sudden, dramatic departure and AJ's erratic behavior. AJ's perfect life was now officially tainted by a police file. Savi, meanwhile, reached out to a trusted family friend, a lawyer in Atlanta, who connected her with a domestic violence and survivors advocacy group. For the first time, she was able to articulate the terror, the cultural shame AJ had used against her, and the specific acts of violence. The advocate explained to Savi that her actions, taking the car to flee a dangerous situation, were legally justified under the circumstances, and that AJ's acts could be prosecuted as felony assault and battery, with the added complexity of a possible hate crime due to his specific focus on her American identity and freedom. Savi chose a path of cautious self-preservation. She did not immediately press criminal charges. Instead, her lawyer filed for an immediate, emergency temporary protection order, TPO, in Florida. The protection order cited AJ's threats, his isolation of Savi, and the documented physical violence, the hair and the shove. The filing of the TPO was the final, formal declaration of the war between them, making the details of their horrific wedding night a matter of public legal record. When AJ was served with the TPO, he was stunned. The legal document, forbidding him from coming within 500 feet of Savi or contacting her, was the ultimate public humiliation. It confirmed to him that his attempts to regain control had failed spectacularly. His shame was no longer private, it was a matter of state court record. His attempts to contact his family in India were fraught with difficulty, as he struggled to explain his wife's erratic behavior, without admitting the truth of his own violence. The TPO made him a pariah in his own professional circles, as the incident reports were easily discoverable by his firm's corporate security team. Within 2 months, the stress and legal complications cost him his position as a high-level software architect. The American dream he had built was completely incinerated, ironically, by his own hand. The divorce was swift and clean. Savi's lawyer used the TPO and the police report as leverage. AJ, terrified of criminal prosecution and the revocation of his green card, agreed to a quiet, uncontested divorce, signing over the house and substantial financial assets to Savy as part of the settlement to ensure her silence and to avoid a public trial. The final papers were signed 6 months after the assault. AJ left Florida, moving to a different state where his name and reputation were unknown, forced to take a lower-paying, anonymous job, forever living under the shadow of the restraining order and his shattered career. Savy's life, meanwhile, took a profound turn. The act of fleeing, surviving, and finding her voice transformed her. She finished her degree, found work in the nonprofit sector, and began volunteering for the same domestic violence advocacy group that had helped save her life. She turned the scar of her chopped hair into a symbol of resilience, cutting it short and vibrant, a visible, powerful reclamation of her body and her autonomy. She realized the infidelity had been born of loneliness and a lack of self-worth, and that AJ's violence had been born of tradition, shame, and a demand for control. Neither action was justifiable, but both were a tragedy of two lives that should never have merged. Years later, Savy Hayes became a powerful regional voice for survivors, using her story, the story of the American wife and the immigrant husband, the collision of cultures, and the devastating consequences of betrayal and rage, as a cautionary tale. She emphasized that violence and control have no accent, no passport, and no cultural justification. Her tale was a testament to the fact that while a beautiful home and financial success can mask deep emotional and cultural divides, only honesty, communication, and mutual respect can truly sustain a marriage. The perfect life they had built in Florida was a mirage, and the truth, though initially devastating, was the only foundation upon which Savy could finally build a life that was truly her own, truly safe, and truly free. And if Savy's final, powerful victory in overcoming the trauma resonates with you, then this is your final chance. Show your heart and your support for every survivor by liking this video and subscribing to our channel, because the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth the fight.